Hello everyone, my name is Andrei Barbu. I'm a pre-sales engineer with UiPath. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, and today we will continue our series of webinars regarding applying CI/CD concepts to RPA development. The last time we discussed the steps that are part of a CI/CD pipeline, and one of the steps, the first one, was the build step, in which the developer pushes his code to a Git repository, which triggers a pipeline. We are using in our example an Azure pipeline, and that pipeline will need an agent, a running environment where all our commands are executed. And we will look at creating a Docker image from which a Docker container will be created, which will actually run the agent. That Docker image needs to contain the UiPath robot, and we also need a way of communicating with the orchestrator. And in our case, we're going to use a PowerShell library. So we want to have this Docker image built and made available to Azure pipelines, and therefore we will need to host it somewhere in the cloud. The fact that I have this image on my machine will not really help. So we will start with some prerequisites today. I've created a GitHub repository, UiPath Dockerized Robot, which will host our code. I've also created a resource group within my Azure subscription. I've named it UiPath Good Practices Resource Group. And I've also created a project in my UiPath in my Azure DevOps account, UiPath Good Practices. Here we will create the pipelines that we will reference throughout the series of webinars. I've also cloned the GitHub repository on my machine, and we are now looking at the Docker file. So we will start with an image. Obviously, it's going to be a Windows image. So we will start with Windows Server Core as the base Docker image. And let's see, we have Microsoft. We're going to be looking for the latest image, and this is it. And we'll start from that. So from our steps would be something like this. We're gonna download MSI installer from the web, and this is the download link, uipath.com/uipathstudio.msi. And normally we would install this, so we would also add an output. We're gonna store it, say, locally to uipathstudio.msi, and then we're gonna run it. So we're gonna run uipathstudio.msi locally. We need to look at UiPath install command line arguments to see exactly what is the correct command to install it silently. So we want to add local some features, desktop feature and robot. So add local equals desktop feature. And we're also gonna install the robot. And let's see. Let's install it in a specific location. And we also need to provide an entry point to our container. CMD should be fine. So the very basic image that will contain our UiPath Dockerized robot will be this one. And let's build it. Docker build. Let's give it a name, UiPath robot, let's say, and let's see how it goes. In the meantime, we need to prepare our cloud. We will need a container registry within our Azure resource group to host the image we've created. So I think it's called Container Registry, if I remember correctly. Cool. Most of them I'm gonna leave. Let's move them to Australia Southeast, and let's give it a name. Let's say UiPath Robot. This will take a little bit of time to be created. So in the meantime, I'm gonna go to my Azure DevOps and I will start creating a pipeline. This pipeline will have the purpose of taking my Docker file and building the Docker image and then pushing it to the container registry we've just created in Microsoft Azure. So let's create a new pipeline. It will be triggered by a GitHub event, as we discussed. So me as a developer, I'm pushing code to GitHub to a specific repository. I want this repository to be linked to my Azure DevOps, and I want it to trigger the pipeline. So let's look for the repository. It's conveniently the last one. And let's do, they have some ready-made pipeline configurations. Let's start with this one, Docker build and push an image to Azure Container Registry. As you can see, because I have single sign-on between those two environments, my Azure DevOps and my Azure portal, I can just do a little bit of click without a lot of configuration necessary, which is a lot easier to get started with. And we also have the container registry, which we have built here. So if we go to our Azure portal, within our resource group, we have a container registry called UiPath Robot, which is pre-populated here in the drop-down list, which is really convenient. Let's give it a shorter name, shall we, to the image. Let's say UiPath Robot. It's just easier to remember, I guess. Let's validate. So Azure DevOps has created for us a pipeline, and the pipeline has some variables here, and it has also, if we go to our project settings, service connections, it has created two connections. One of them is to GitHub, meaning that every commit and push that the developer performs into GitHub is used to trigger a pipeline. Basically, it's sort of like a webhook. The other connection is the UiPath Robot to the Docker registry. As we said here, we are in Azure DevOps, and we want Azure DevOps build agent to have the permission to not only build the image, which it builds locally, but also push it to the Docker registry. The Docker registry is part of Azure. We find it in Azure portal within a resource group, and obviously we don't want everyone to have the right to push and pull to that registry. It's our registry. And therefore, Azure DevOps will create this will create a service principal which will be used to authenticate the Azure DevOps agent performing the build to the Azure Container Registry. And we can find that here in app registrations. We will find all the applications that under our credentials have created a service principal. So this service principal will have certain permissions And if we copy this name, which you don't have to remember, obviously it's a very long name, and we go into our container registry, into access control, and we just look here into role assignments, we'll find the fact that this application has a contributor role on this instance, on this resource. Now, looking at our newly created pipeline, we can find the structure on Azure DevOps YAML pipeline, and we'll find the schema here. We're going to use a very small subset of all the items in the schema. We will have it triggered from master for now, and we'll define some variables which will configure the way the pipeline runs. But basically, we will build a Docker file, which has the name Docker file. We will tag it with a build ID, which is generated by the Azure pipelines for every build, and it will target the repository we've created and the service connection that was created for us a little bit earlier. I will save the YAML pipeline, which will also commit it to GitHub. If I go into GitHub and I refresh, I will see the fact that a new file was added to my repository. The first time the pipeline will not run successfully because the Docker file is empty. We haven't pushed anything to the Git repository. So if we navigate to the build, we can see the fact that the Docker file cannot be empty, which is absolutely to be expected. We're not concerned about that. And our local build is complete. Let's see how it went. Let's do a docker run -it UiPath robot. Right now, the Docker on my machine will create a container from that image, and we have a command line within that container. First thing we notice is the fact that we have the MSI installer here, and we also have the installation folder. Let's go inside the installation folder. We will have a very large number of files. We are just interested in one functionality. We're interested in UI robot with the back functionality, which exists. Obviously, we're gonna have an error because we don't have a project to actually build, but we are happy with the results so far. I will exit, and there is one more thing we need to be mindful of. Let's do a git pull. If you remember, we have this new file, the Azure pipeline file, which was created by Azure DevOps for us and was pushed to our GitHub repo here. And we want this file to end up on our machine as well. So we'll just do a git pull. And this is the file. We do have to make one small adjustment. Azure DevOps has a pool of build agents, and they are either Ubuntu or Windows. I think they have a Mac OS as well, but we cannot build this image on an Ubuntu VM. We need to build it on a Windows VM. So let's see how we are. We've modified those two files. We know. Let's see. Let's commit with message initial commit. And let's do a git push to origin. And we should see momentarily the fact that we've created this commit is great. Now, if we go into our Azure DevOps and we look at the pipeline runs, we see the fact that one of them was just kicked off. The initial build will take a while, will take around an hour, because it has to push all the layers of the image. And if we look on our machine and we see a Docker image list, we see the fact that our image is quite big. It's not a small image, it's a very big image. So that will take a while, 40 minutes to 50 minutes on the first one. But because we have different layers, and the first layer is quite substantial to begin with, we see the fact that Microsoft has a 5 gigabyte layer. This layer will be cached. So once we do the first push into our Azure Container Registry, the subsequent pushes will just skip this, will be cached. We don't have to push it. So the first one will be a little bit longer, but that's fine because it's going to give us some time to fix some other issue. And if we look at our Docker image, we see the fact that we have 5 layers and that we download an MSI installer, we create a local path, and we run the MSI installer. Obviously, after this, we would probably want to remove the MSI installer because it doesn't add any value to the image. We should remove it. And furthermore, we'd probably want to reduce number of layers. If we go to Docker and we look at good practices or best practices, we see the fact that they suggest that instead of having multiple layers to install just one piece of software, we should merge them into one layer. So in one step, perform the actual download of the file, installation, and removal of the installation kit, of the installation MSI. Now, we are running on Windows, and therefore we don't have curl, we don't have wget at command line, we're gonna have to use PowerShell for this. So we're gonna look at our Docker file and try to remove these 3 layers and merge them all into one. So instead of add, which is a Docker command to download and or copy files, we're gonna do run, and we're gonna run PowerShell. Let's do this. PowerShell. And let's first solve our installation path. Let's say minus item type, if I remember correctly. Let's see. And this is minus name. We can always come back and fix them if you make typing errors, which is something that happens. So let's say invoke web request, and I think this one comes with minus out file. I'm putting semicolon and tag at the end. We don't need this anymore. Let's start process. We're gonna start this process. We need to pass minus argument list. We're gonna pass this argument list, and we're gonna wait for it to finish. And we want to remove item. We want to remove the installation kit, the installation MSI at the end. We don't want it to ship it with the image. It just adds weight to the image with no real value to it. So let's do this, and minus force, so it doesn't ask us if we really want to. I think we are okay with this. I think we have to one more thing, minus path. Let's see how it goes. Let's build it locally. And And in the meantime, let's see how our pipeline is doing. So this is the log from the build agent. And we see the fact that we have started with our Windows image. We've downloaded the install MSI. We've created the installation path. We have installed UiPath Studio. We've created the entry point. And our job has been completed, actually. That's great. So, going into Azure, in our container registry, repositories, we see the fact that we have a new repository called UiPath Robot, and it has a tag of 5 being the 5th run of this pipeline in its lifetime. And after a little bit of tinkering, our build is done. Let's see how it went. So we set UiPath Robot. And the first thing we're going to notice is that we no longer have the installation kit, the installation MSI, and which is good. And we still have the UiPath installed locally. Let's see. Also, we've just shaved a quite significant part of a bit of our image size, which is also very good. It's smaller is better with Docker images. Let's commit our changes. Let's call them update Docker file, remove MSI, and let's push this. Our commit will become visible here, and if we go into our Azure DevOps, we see that a new build has been triggered, and the new version of our image will be built and then pushed to the Azure Container Registry. One more thing we need to think of before we move on. We have discussed the fact that we want to have a system or a setup in which the build artifact is progressed through the pipeline and it is pushed to orchestrators along the way. This means that our pipeline or our build agent not only needs to have the ability to create our package, but also needs to have the ability to interact with Orchestrator. And for this, we're gonna need to have one more thing added to our image. We will need to have UiPath PowerShell library installed, which you can find on GitHub. It is a library which allows us to hit the Orchestrator exposed API and interact with it. And the installation is quite straightforward. We just need to add these 3 commands. So, let's go back to our Docker file. We have successfully installed Studio so far, and we want to just add the installation, the PowerShell installation commands, which just install a package provider, add a repository, and install a module. Let's do UiPath Robot. Let's build it locally, see how it goes. And in the meantime, we can probably check on our pipeline. Our build has just started and it should be ready quite quickly. While our build is running, let's just have a look at the README for our project. I've added a badge for the Azure pipeline, which you can find in pipelines, status badge, and you can just copy it and add it to your repository. This will see if the latest push was successful or not, and a small diagram which highlights what we've done today. We've created a subscription. Within that subscription, we've created a resource group, and within the resource group, we've created an Azure Container Registry. In Azure DevOps, we've created a project, and we've created a pipeline. That pipeline is being triggered by a GitHub repository, and it contains an agent running on Windows, which will download the code, our Docker file, and we'll build locally, and then we use the service principal to authenticate to the Azure Container Registry and push the image. I hope you found this useful. You will find the Git repo and the resources in the video description. See you next time.